Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we are test driving the Radeon RX 5600 XT for the first time, and I'm really hoping I can make it through this lengthy review without saying 5700 XT when I really mean 5600 XT and not 5500 XT. Anyway, my small personal battles aside, AMD officially announced the 5600 XT earlier this month at CES 2020 and pretty much gave us all the important information. We got detailed specs covering stuff such as the core count, the operating frequency, memory configuration, pricing information, and even performance figures comparing the 5600 XT to competing products from Nvidia. And that really just left us reviewers to confirm this information in our day one reviews, and most of us got busy doing just that about a week ago. Though, as is often the case when testing new AMD products, the process didn't go all that smoothly, but not for the usual reasons. It seems the problem with generating hype by announcing basically everything about an upcoming product is that you're notifying your competition of your plans in advance. Essentially, AMD gave Nvidia 2 weeks notice to react and counter the 5600 XT, and that's exactly what they did. About a week after the CES trade show, Nvidia dropped the price of their GeForce RTX 2060 Founders Edition model down to just $300 US on their website. And that's a 14% discount from the original $350 US price. EVGA also announced the KO edition, pretty subtle name that one, and that also has a $300 US MSRP. It's hard to know if this is a limited time only price, and at the time of creating this video, both the EVGA KO and Nvidia's Founders Edition models are out of stock, making the cheapest available RTX 2060 about $320 US. Whether or not Nvidia's price cut was just a ploy to steal AMD's thunder didn't really matter. The result was always going to be the same, and it meant that AMD did need to react, or they'd be risking lackluster day one reviews. And this is because, given the specs that were announced at CES, we were pretty sure that the RTX 2060 was going to be around 10% faster than the 5600 XT, but with the price updates, it would only cost 7% more, and that would mean that the 5600 XT was going to be another dead-on-arrival Navi GPU. I'm of course talking about the 5500 XT here, and it would just be another disaster for AMD. So by announcing pricing and specs ahead of time, AMD have pretty much played themselves on this one and just made it all too easy for Nvidia. An obvious solution to this mess would have just been for AMD to reduce pricing as they did with the 5700 series, but it seems as though AMD are either unwilling or unable to do so, so the 5600 XT will remain at $280 US. The less ideal and far messier option is to change the 5600 XT spec by overclocking it for better performance, and this is exactly what AMD has opted to do. Shortly after reviewers received their 5600 XT samples, AMD sent a panicked email warning us that there would be a VBIOS update incoming that would boost performance quite substantially, and therefore any testing conducted prior to the update would now be invalid. Initially, it wasn't clear if this was a bug with the current BIOS, but before long it became clear what AMD was up to. Realizing that the 5600 XT was going to come up short, they've unofficially increased the core clock by up to 15% and the memory frequency by 17%. Now, I say they've increased the spec unofficially because at CES AMD said the 5600 XT would operate at a game clock of 1375 MHz with a boost clock of up to 1560 MHz. Those numbers have now technically increased to 1615 MHz for the game clock and 1750 MHz for the boost, at least for the factory OC models. The 6GB of GDDR6 memory has also been overclocked from a transfer speed of 12 gigabits per second originally to 14 gigabits per second for the final updated spec, again for the OC models. This new OC ceiling, which is intended to allow the 5600 XT to tackle the cheaper RTX 2060 models, really is a significant step up from the base spec. Typically, you'll see OC models offering around a 3 to 5% performance increase when compared to the reference spec. At least this was the case with the RX 5700 XT range. Here though, the OC models will be around 13% faster than base models, and we're talking about 13% faster on average, not up to 13% faster, so that really is a significant difference. It's also worth noting that AMD sampled reviewers exclusively using an OC model, and that particular model is Sapphire's Pulse. But we also have MSI's Gaming X along for review as well. The problem is, there will be models such as MSI's Mech OC, for example, which will be over 10% slower than the OC models. And there might only be a $10 difference in price, so you really want to be careful with which model you buy. And this late change has really created a big mess for not just AMD and their partners, but also retailers and customers. A number of AIBs have confirmed with me that their first wave of products have already shipped prior to the changes made by AMD, and that means pretty much all 5600 XTs available at launch will have the original BIOS and won't perform quite as well as what's shown in most day one reviews. So that being the case, I'll be showing 5600 XT results both before and after the BIOS update, and the before results pretty much represent base spec performance. I have a few other concerns about these changes, but for now I think it's time we just got into the results, and I'll talk about those concerns later on in the video. For testing, I'm using our Core i9 9900K GPU test rig, which comes clocked at 5GHz with 16GB of DDR4 3400 memory, and the exact graphics card models used for testing will be in the description below. Though please note the MSI RX 5600 XT Gaming X was used exclusively for all the 5600 XT testing in this video. Finally, we have 12 games to look at, and all have been tested at 1080p and 1440p using medium to high quality presets or settings. So let's get into the results. First up, we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and here the updated version of MSI's 5600 XT Gaming X model is a few frames faster than the RTX 2060. You can really see why the 5600 XT factory overclock ceiling has been increased, as the 11% boost seen in this title allows it to edge ahead of the RTX 2060 rather than trail it by an 8% margin. It's a similar story at 1440p really, though this time the RTX 2060 manages to edge ahead of the 5600 XT by a single frame, so yeah, it's pretty much a tie. Before the upgrade, the 5600 XT was 12% slower than the RTX 2060, so again, you can see why AMD needed to make the change. Testing with Assassin's Creed Odyssey saw the 5600 XT again match the RTX 2060 after the update, and that means it is just 6% slower than the RX 5700 and 7% slower than the 2060 Super. Identical performance between the 5600 XT and RTX 2060 can be seen at 1440p, and this time the new $280 Navi GPU is just 8% slower than the RX 5700. Nvidia's Turing-based GPUs have become very competitive in Red Dead Redemption 2, and in fact the RTX 2060 has now edged ahead of the RX 5700. As a result, the 5600 XT is quite a bit slower, lagging behind by a 16% margin using the high quality settings with the Vulkan API. And it's a similar story at 1440p, though this time the 5600 XT is 13% slower, still a pretty big margin though. Then when compared to the 5600 XT base spec, the OC model was 12% faster. World of Tanks is another title where the Turing-based GPUs, and really Nvidia GPUs in general, do really well. The RTX 2060, for example, that can be seen matching the RX 5700. This meant the OC version of the 5700 XT was 10% slower, while the base model was around 17% slower. The margins do close up a bit at 1440p. Here the 5600 XT OC was 6% slower than the RTX 2060, though base models will still be around 16% slower. Clearly, the extra memory bandwidth is playing a key role in boosting performance of the OC version. Far Cry New Dawn results, they're quite interesting. Even the base spec 5600 XT is very close to not just the RTX 2060, but also the RX 5700. Clearly, even with the Core i9 9900K, there is some kind of system bottleneck here. Jumping up to 1440p does see some separation, and now even the factory overclocked 5600 XT is slower than the RX 5700, though only by a 7% margin. It was also 7% faster than the RTX 2060, though the base spec is still a few frames slower. Frame rates in Rainbow Six Siege are very competitive. Here AMD's last minute OC update is enough to put the 5600 XT on par with the RTX 2060, making it just 9% slower than the RX 5700. That said, base model 5600 XTs will trail the RTX 2060 by a 10% margin out of the box. Interestingly, we see a situation at 1440p where AMD's 5600 XT falls behind the RTX 2060, which appears to benefit from superior memory compression technology. It's also strange to see the 5600 XT now matching the RX 5700, so quite a surprising result here. In Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, the base 5600 XT spec places it just ahead of the GTX 1660 Super, which is what we know AMD was targeting originally. With Nvidia's RTX 2060 price cut, that wouldn't cut it. So the new OC ceiling puts the 5600 XT on par with the 2060 Super, though it also means that the 5600 XT is basically able to offer RX 5700 like performance in this title, so that is something I imagine AMD did want to avoid. The 1440p resolution does give the RX 5700 a little more breathing room, but even so, the factory overclocked 5600 XT was just 8% slower and 5% slower than the RTX 2060. Next up we have Battlefield 5. The base model configuration sees the 5600 XT fall short of the RTX 2060 by a 5% margin, while the factory OC version was 3% faster. It's a very similar situation at 1440p, though it's interesting to note that even at this higher resolution, the factory overclocked 5600 XT is still just 10% slower than the RX 5700. Here we see that the 5600 XT OC model will be able to match the RTX 2060 in titles such as Call of Duty Modern Warfare, whereas base models will be 8% slower. It's pretty much the same story at 1440p, and here the 5600 XT OC cards are just 8% slower than the RX 5700. The higher-end Turing GPUs do seem to suffer from weaker than expected frame time performance in Metro Exodus when using the ultra quality settings. The RTX 2060, for example, is quite a bit slower than the 5600 XT in that regard, even when compared to the base model. Again, the 5600 XT OC isn't a great deal slower than the RX 5700, this time just 10% slower at 1080p. The jump up to 1440p really does result in similar margins. The overclocked 5600 XT is just 9% slower than the RX 5700, while it was 12% faster than the RTX 2060 when comparing the average frame rate. The second last game we're going to look at is F1 2019, and here the 5600 XT OC was almost at the same level as the RTX 2060 Super, and that meant it was 7% faster than the standard RTX 2060. We also see a 9% performance boost from the base spec to the factory OC versions of the 5600 XT. Once again, we find a similar situation at 1440p, and it really is impressive to see the 5600 XT trailing the RX 5700 by just a 6% margin. Finally, we have Gears of War 5, and here the base spec 5600 XT averaged 81 FPS while the factory OC spec was 12% faster. The RTX 2060 does well here, and it's just able to edge out the RX 5700, which meant it was 11% faster than the 5600 XT OC. Here we see that the 6GB 5600 XT, I'm just bring up 6GB because that's the frame buffer size, there's no 8GB or 4GB version, it's just 6GB, but anyway, it does fall away a little bit at 1440p, as here it was 11% slower than the RX 5700 and 13% slower than the RTX 2060. Power consumption is obviously a big advantage of these newer 7nm Navi GPUs, at least when compared to previous Radeon GPUs. When compared to Nvidia's Turing GPUs, the factory overclocked 5600 XT is still very efficient, offering a similar level of performance while saving around 20 watts of total system power. Okay, so that's how the base model and factory overclocked Radeon RX 5600 XT graphics cards will perform. Now it's time to see how they stack up overall, and then of course take a look at our cost per frame data. Right, so on average at 1080p, the MSI 5600 XT Gaming X and RTX 2060, which is also a factory OC model from MSI called the Gaming Z, they delivered the exact same performance. This also means, on average, factory overclocked 5600 XT models will be around 10% faster than base models, so a pretty big difference there out of the box. We can also see that the base model 5600 XTs do have the GTX 1660 Super covered, as AMD promised, delivering 13% more performance on average. Meanwhile, the overclocked 5600 XT was just 7% slower than the RX 5700 on average, while the MSRP is 20% lower. Realistically, the OC models will probably be around 15% cheaper. Even at 1440p, the overclocked MSI gaming versions of the RTX 2060 and 5600 XT are evenly matched. Base model cards will be 10% slower, but of course you can manually overclock those anyway. Okay, so time for our cost per frame analysis, and first let's just compare the MSI gaming versions of the 5600 XT and RTX 2060. Given both delivered 125 FPS on average, it's pretty obvious which model wins here. I'm expecting the Gaming X version of the 5600 XT to be priced at least $20 over MSRP, just as the RTX 2060 Gaming Z model is. I've also included two prices for the RTX 2060 Gaming Z. The $370 US listing is the current retail price at the time of making this video, whereas the second alleged price with the $50 discount is what we're yet to see, but hoping to see. In any case, even with the $50 price cut, the RTX 2060 Gaming Z will still cost 7% more than the 5600 XT Gaming X. However, at current prices, the GeForce card costs 32% more, making the 5600 XT a vastly superior choice in terms of value. So there you have it, what I suppose is an apples to apples AIB comparison. Now, here's a look at the cost per frame data for all the currently available GPUs that were tested. Please note we have two RTX 2060 prices. The $330 price represents the cheapest currently available model, while the $300 price represents the EVGA KO and NVIDIA FE models, even though right now they're not in stock. Then we have two performance and price configurations for the 5600 XT. There's the base model at the MSRP, and then an OC performance version, which I believe will come in at least a $10 premium for models such as the Sapphire Pulse, which I also have on hand for testing, and it delivers the same performance as MSI's Gaming X version. The best value option here will be the cheaper OC versions at $10 over the MSRP, again, such as the Pulse. Basically, I think it's fair to say you'll want to ensure that you're buying an OC model, as the base models are pretty poor value, and yes, you can overclock them, but they will likely come with pretty weak coolers, so I think you're just better off spending $290 to $300 US on a better quality model. The RTX 2060 is decent value at $300, but realistically, right now you are looking at having to spend at least $330 to $350, again, at the time of making this video, which makes the 5600 XT a much better value choice in either configuration, which is what AMD was betting on from the get-go. It's also worth pointing out that the GTX 1660 Super still stacks up really well here in terms of value, and while base model 5600 XTs might be 24% faster, in terms of cost per frame, the 1660 Super is a little better. Well, in short, the Radeon RX 5600 XT is a decent product. It won't blow your socks off, but it offers a little more value in the $250 to $300 price range. It's also better value than the Radeon RX 5700 and makes the RTX 2060 Super a really tough buy, if it wasn't already. Given the competition in this price range, I think AMD has done okay, but again, not amazing. Certainly not going to blow you away, but it is an improvement and certainly better than what I thought we might have ended up with, especially given what the 5500 XT offered at the $200 to $170 price point. The main advantage of the more expensive RX 5700 is the extra 2GB of VRAM, which, depending on the games you play, the quality settings you like to use, and the resolution, that may or may not factor into your buying decision. I know a lot of people will complain about the 6GB VRAM buffer, and I certainly get where you're coming from, and I tend to agree that 8GB really should be the minimum in 2020, especially for a card priced near $300 US, but at least for now it won't really matter for 1080p gaming. So overall it's decent, but let's talk more about how AMD handled this release. The last minute decision to raise the ceiling on the AIB OC models was a desperate move that's going to cause a few teething issues. As I said, I know pretty much all AIBs have shipped their first batch of 5600 XTs, and none of them feature the updated BIOS, so that is going to be a very messy and frustrating process for all involved. How these updates are handled and who takes care of the process will depend on probably the brand, the region, and then even the retailer. Tech-savvy users can just download the updated BIOS themselves and then apply it in a few seconds, but others will require a third party to support them, or they'll probably just simply not bother and miss out on that extra 10% or so performance. You could always manually overclock, but that's a less elegant sort of solution, and frankly, I don't find GPU overclocking all that practical. Initially, I was concerned with how well most 5600 XT graphics cards would handle the increased factory overclock, but after asking around, it seems like most AIBs have simply used their 5700 series coolers, so there should be plenty of headroom, and AMD say this is something they carefully evaluated before making the change. Still, I'm interested to see which models get the overclock and which ones are stuck at the much slower, much lower base clocks. So that's something we'll no doubt get to explore over the coming weeks. I'm also interested to see how many RTX 2060 models actually hit $300 and when stock will return for the EVGA KO and NVIDIA FE models. I'm almost expecting this to be a very limited run deal just to steal AMD's thunder. I guess worst case, it forced AMD to make the 5600 XT a little closer to the 5700 than they would have liked to, so probably not a bad thing. Something I haven't touched on yet is overclocking, basically because the OC headroom went from 0 to 0. As it stands, the factory overclocked models like the Pulse and Gaming X can be pushed to around 1820 MHz for the core, so yeah, a further 4% frequency bump while you can squeeze 6% more frequency out of the memory. Using soft power play tables, it will be possible to go higher, and this is something I'll probably explore shortly, but as far as more convenient overclocking goes, the thing's pretty well tapped out. Finally, it's good to see some more competition in the GPU space, and I'm sure once we finally have competition at all price points, things really will heat up. On that note, if AMD could optimize the way they release information, I feel that would also benefit them. Probably don't show your hand weeks in advance, but I also appreciate not having to race around and get pricing last minute, usually half a day before reviews go live. So somewhere between half a day and 2 weeks would probably be more optimal. So that's probably something AMD can look into for future releases. But anyway, that is going to do it for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed this review. If you did, you know what to do. And if you'd like to get more involved with the Unboxed channel, then you can join us over on Patreon, get access to our monthly live streams, Discord chat, and a few other cool perks. You can check that out, links in the video description. Also have merch, so yeah, check that out if you're interested. Anyway, that is going to do it for this one. Thank you for watching. I'm your host, Steve, and I'll see you again next time. Much respect.